I know I'm going to get some hackles for this one, but in a statement, Breath of Fire 2. Wow. One of the things I've talked about a lot, and has come up a lot in recent times, is just how much I seem to value gameplay more than other people do when it comes to RPGs in particular. Because a lot of people play an RPG and they're just interested in the story, and that's fine, by the way. Obviously, there's no judgment. There's no nothing here. I'm sorry. I just noticed that this is actually visible here. I actually had this up the whole time, just to... as a gift from my sister. Very appropriate for this game, because this game sucks. Go ahead, get it out of your system. But if you don't want to listen to the rest of this, that's totally okay. If you don't want to read the thing on the website, which goes into more detail, or if you don't want to actually watch the stream, no judgment. But I'll explain myself, because I kind of already gave it away, didn't I? The story's actually pretty legit in Breath of Fire 2, even in the SNES version, which is what we were playing. And with a proper fan mod translating it into something a little bit more approximating English, it's an even better story. There's a palpable sense of wrongness to Boff 2, in a good way. Everything feels just a little bit off. People are violent and bloodthirsty in a way that's honestly kind of creepy, almost cultish. There's a scene in this game where two people actually are murdered in front of a throng of people, and the people's response is to just be cheering out for their blood, and then once they're murdered, they then go into like a chant for their god. It's really creepy, but in all the right ways. Even the villainous organization isn't actually evil, as absolutely bizarre as that sounds. Obviously, the people running it are. They're literal demons. But my point is, like, the organization goes out of its way to do good, to help people, to give to people. But the entire time they're doing that, there's a degree of gaslighting they're doing. They're insisting that the only good can come from us. It's okay. We know you're a sinner. It's all right. We accept you. We embrace you. And we are the path by which you will find salvation. And they give food, and they give help, and they give all of this stuff. There's a really, really messed up story point later on in the story where we find out that one of their tactics is to first spread the teachings of Saint Eva all over the place. So that's what people believe in. And then torture people to death. And as they get more and more desperate from starvation and hunger, as they're being locked in a cage and left there to rot, they desperately, in pain and anguish, pray to salvation, to the only thing that they know. And those prayers naturally feed their god, aka the demon behind all of this. It's extraordinarily messed up, and it's awesome. It's the best part of the story by far. Even the characters have really good character moments. Rand and his mother, Kat and his understanding her feelings for Ryu, Nina and coming to grips with her position with her family. Even Bo gets a little bit of a moment. Jean understanding the nature of his existence. Sten has a great section, despite being a Sten section. We'll talk about that in a second. So the story axis is legit. Cool. So what are my issues with it? 61 net gameplay negatives. That's my issues with it. I've actually got the whole list up right here. The game does a few things right. You know, some good music, which we're listening to right now. Looks good. You know, some good viscerality. There are a couple of neat little moments. There's one or two good dungeons, and the mini games are nice, and the fusion system's kind of cool. And then there's everything else. You probably think of the Breath of Fire right now in your head. Think of the Breath of Fire 2 soundtrack, okay? Now, you're probably thinking, "Oh yeah, good soundtrack, right?" Well, here's the thing. Oh, hang on. We're halfway through the song. And that's a loop. That's it. This is the dungeon song. It plays for almost every dungeon in the game. This song legitimately gets more playtime than every other song in the game combined, with the possible exception of the fight music. And even the fight music is a maybe on that. You hear this song constantly. And there's several songs like that. Very short loop songs that are not good and that are repetitive and just drag the whole soundtrack down. Don't mistake me, there's some songs in this game I like too. Like, for example, if I can find it here really quick. It's, of course, loading now. Well, that's not it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's called. That's the problem. They're all these fanciful names. I think it's this one, actually. Hey, it is. The second Overworld song. Like, this is cool, right? Oops. A little too quiet. Incredible production values here. I'm doing all this live to try and minimize the amount of editing and the amount of time it takes to put this together, because as I'm telling you this right now, I should be streaming, which is my actual job. So I'm cutting into stream time to do this. So forgive me for the lack of editing polish here, because I don't have time for editing. My lunch was a reheated burger, and that's my lunch break, you know what I mean? Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that you think of the visuals and they look cool, and then you think of how many drab dungeons are. You think of the music, and that's cool. Think of how many drab dungeons that you go through there. The backtracking is bonkers. The encounter rate is the actual worst I've ever seen in any video game I've covered. There's a part of the game where you have to go up half the world, across an entire continent, and then down, and then up and down, and then up. Now, I believe I skipped a step there, but the point is you have to make that trip multiple times in a row, which by itself is aggravating. And then there's the dungeon design, which is awful. And they do this thing. It's really frustrating because the camera's really kind of strange in this game. And so they do this thing where you'll see a path, and it's kind of loops in on itself, and it looks the same as the path you're already on. So if you get into too many encounters, you might physically lose where you're at in the dungeon. And then it's like, oh, whoops, and then you go the wrong way, and then you realize you're going the wrong way, and then you turn back, and the encounter rate is so high that it actually gets in the way of the dungeon design. Did I mention the bosses in this game? Because almost every boss in the game is bullcrap. Not all of them, but a lot of the bosses in this game, like Kuadora, or God forbid Algernon, which is just terrible. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Sten section. The Sten section is a sequence in which you're suddenly forced to do an entire section of a dungeon and a mini-boss with just Sten. No warning, and if you save, no backing out of it. So you're stuck there. That's a Sten section. It's a Sten section, for those who don't know, is a Princess Peach section, but bad, put very, very simply. So named for Sten in this very game. Actually, every Breath of Fire game has had a Sten section to some extent, but none of them as bad as this one. And the whole... I hate it. And the worst thing about so much of these things is they all boil down to the same thing. What I refer to as walkthroughitis. If you have a walkthrough, if you know what you're doing, this game isn't nearly that bad. Not really. You could remove a huge number of the negatives I gave for this game if you know what you're doing. And this is what I said the last time I streamed this game, too. If you already have a guide, or if you have someone sitting next to you helping you, or if you're replaying it, then you have an idea of what you're doing and what's coming, and all of a sudden you can prep for it. The Sten section I just mentioned, that's easy. Keep Sten in the party the entire time up to the point so he's always getting levels and experience, and make sure that he gets the kind of gear and equipment he needs in order to actually be in top-notch format. If you do that, you're fine, and the Sten section just breezes right through it. It's a cool story sequence. But that's because you knew it was coming. Make sense? And you might accidentally level Sten, but it is entirely possible to not do so because of the way the game calculates experience. So, like, this isn't BOF 1. The people not in the party do not gain experience. All of this is the main issues of the game. Encounter rate, the backtracking, the walkthroughitis, the boss design, the level design. But then we run into the difficulty cliffing. Let me talk about something. I'm going to go into this, so please forgive me. But I spent some time on this. If you look at the overwhelming majority of JRPGs in particular, the intro follows a fairly distinct pattern. Town, dungeon, boss, end of intro, right? Now, there's some rejiggering there, depending on the specific JRPG, but if you think about it in your head, you could probably think of most sequences where that follows through. Final Fantasy IV, or Secret of Mana, or I'm not going to go down the list, but you get the idea, right? BOF 2 does the exact same thing. You have your story prologue, which is great, by the way. Nothing but positive. It's a great sequence. Then, okay, we need to go rescue the pet. Little town sequence, little overworld section, dungeon, boss, boom, done, end of intro. No problems. Except for everything. There's a saying that actually irritates me if I'm being honest. And it boils down to, hey lore, you like X, so why don't you like Y? And it's such a frustrating argument because on the surface of it, it's such a logical argument, right? One of the most common ones I get, for example, is how can I like Final Fantasy if I don't like anime? You know, I've heard that one before. But the truth is, the details matter. Just because this is a JRPG that does an intro sequence like other JRPGs do, doesn't make it good. In fact, the intro in this game is garbage. Because you have to take into account the specific details. How much experience does it take for you to level? How much experience do enemies give you? What's their health? How much damage do they do per round? All of those same figures for the boss at the end of the intro. And, this is crucial, how much stronger do you get on level up? Because the stat gains in this game are actually really low because the game is designed around the idea of making you engage with the hunting, the fishing, and the cooking mini games in order to actually get your stat ups. Fun fact, BOF 1, 2, and 3 all kind of discourage you from leveling by having another system to increase your stats. We'll talk about that more when we get to BOF 3. So, leveling doesn't give you much, leveling is slow, and enemies suck. Then you add in the encounter rate problem, and you run into the issue here. When I was playing through this, I played this particular playthrough with cheats by request, but I bothered to go through most of the intro without cheats just to make this point. It took us over an hour to finally get to the point where we had finished that particular sequence of the game, just because of how much time it takes to get to that first heal point in the cave, and then run back and forth and back and forth and back and forth leveling in order to get to the point where we have the health necessary to beat the boss. And even then, we actually got lucky. As I demonstrated on camera, one or two bad dice rolls, one or two bits of bad luck with who the enemies target or how much damage they do or if they get a crit, or if they hit you at all, can just wipe your party, just like that. And that's it, and you're dead. It's not difficult, it's arduous. And that's the problem. Details matter. Which is a good time as any to talk about the Infinity Dungeon, the worst last dungeon in video gaming. Now, I'm sure there's something somewhere out there that will challenge that someday, but I have a lot of experience under my belt at this point of reviewing and analyzing games and dissecting them and the specific details of what makes them tick. The Infinity Dungeon is, as of this moment, as of this recording, which is, what is the date? It is January 11th, 2024, is the worst last dungeon I've ever encountered in a video game. It's so bad. It's got bad visuals, boring, drab, disinteresting, and easy to get lost in. It also does the exact same labyrinthine thing where it kind of tries to trick you into going the wrong way just by virtue of having one little dead end just out of sight. It's got the weird visual thing in the background, which is actually nauseating to some people. The music is not particularly interesting. It's this kind of slow, monotonous slog music, which I suppose is appropriate, but doesn't make it any more enjoyable. The encounter rate is cranked to the absolute max. I talked about this on camera. There are 4 rough encounter rates in this game. I'm not going to go into the math because it boils down to averages. On average, you'll get an encounter once every 9 steps, 5 steps, 3 steps, or 0. No encounters at all. The Infinity Dungeon is a 3-step average. That means you can literally go 1 step between encounters, and probably closer up to like 5, 6, or 7. But still, massive encounter rate with irritating enemies, which, it's worth noting, by this point in the game, don't really give you much of anything. Then you get to the halfway point of the Infinity Dungeon, you do a couple of cutscenes, and you do a mandatory side quest, which nothing indicates is even there. And if you don't do it, you cannot beat the game, by the way. So you have to go to this mandatory side quest. There's more walkthrough built in right at the outro. And after you do that, it defusions you. Which, if you don't understand how important that is, fusioning is kind of mandatory to really actually break the game in half in a way that the game kind of mandates. And it's just cool to have your shamans in general. So if you wanted to get your shamans back, you have to go all the way back up, go outside, go get the shamans, go back in the goal, all the way down, save, heal, go all the way down the second half of the dungeon, which is when things really get fun. It actually gets kind of twisty and turny, and of course, it's all organic, because of course it's organic. That's a personal peeve, I'm going to let that go. But then you fight the hardest boss in the game, who just beats your teeth in, And it gives you this thing which the game indicates is the right move, and it's totally the wrong move. And then once you do that, it's like, okay, then there's a save and recovery point, and then you can slog onto the final boss, which, for all intents and purposes, is a really boring boss fight. It almost feels like it was intended to be a victory lap boss, but I guarantee you it wasn't. It just happens to be so much easier than the previous boss fight. And the whole thing sucks. And it's just arduous. And that's BoF 2's gameplay in a nutshell. I actually enjoyed myself relatively this particular playthrough playing with mega cheats. And I think that says something. Now, for anybody who has actually stayed with me, this is a little bit longer than I usually let these run, but I had a lot to talk about here. You can't even access the cooking minigame if you make one choice wrong. One. Nothing indicates that. Hope you had a walkthrough. Thank you for listening to me and my terrible rambling. We're going to be playing BoF 3 about a week ago from the perspective of my perspective, but that'll be the next one after these, and we'll see exactly how that one turns up when we get there. See you guys.